All right. Hello, everyone. We are live here today, and I am very excited for you, especially if you're a parent and you've been looking for answers for your child. If they have sensory issues, if they're going to school and they're struggling with learning or attention, or maybe your child's brain is really stressed out, they suffer with a lot of anxiety, nervousness, all those things are a great opportunity for you today because I'm so excited for our special guest, Michelle Koyama. Welcome, Michelle.
Good morning or afternoon. Yes.
Yes, afternoon now. Hopefully the morning has gone well for you today.
Yes.
Um, and Michelle is an amazing OT over at A Chance to Grow in Northeast Minneapolis. And I'm so excited to have her on today because we work with a lot of people together, and I'm getting parents all the time asking different questions about more resources for their kids. So I'm very excited to be sharing some of those awesome resources today. And just before we start, just so you know, as a parent, if you're watching this right now, what we will be talking about are some very amazing resources to help look at your child's brain in a different way and to help put pieces together. Like I said, if your child's struggling with any of those things, if you've been a parent scouring the internet, like I know a lot of you parents are, you probably heard terms like reflex integration or primary reflexes, or maybe even the technique that Michelle practices called Muscatova. So we're going to talk about how all those things integrate into your child's brain today. So good afternoon, Michelle. What would you say for just starting out here? How did you yourself get involved in this work? Because I know you're an OT and there's
Mhm.
lots of different styles of OT. We'll probably cover that a little bit later of how it differs. But what drew you into this specific type of work helping kids?
Right. Well, my early background was early childhood education and development. So I spent a lot of time learning about how developmental progress happens.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came across doing occupational therapy, I thought initially that what it's going to be was just more individualized attention with those developmental pieces. And when I discovered thinking about occupational therapy through a foundational base, looking at our most bottom basic level skills, that foundation that we do, that I came across the Muscatova method. And what it does for us is it creates a foundation that leads to all the other building blocks that we need for learning. So a lot of times what we do is we take a top-down approach, is that we start with our cognition, that we look at the information that we're giving to children verbally, teaching them things, labeling things, showing them how to do something, expecting them to replicate it. A lot of times that's actually at too high of a level. And what we need to do is go backwards down the scale and start at the very bottom.
Right.
And
I could see a lot of parents when they're coming to either one of us, they're looking, I want my kid maybe to read better or to do multiplication or sit still and pay attention. And so what you're saying is if you go straight to the skill, the higher level brain skill, that's that top down.
right,
Really, although that's the result that parents want and that we want for the kiddos, it's
right,
not always the best way to start, is what you're saying.
right.
Okay.
So the way that we're designed is we first learn some basic developmental movement pieces, and those developmental movement pieces are what bring in the sensory information. So that's where the primary reflexes come in. Is that we have primary reflexes that are designed to help us learn. And one of them that we think of a lot is asymmetric tonic neck reflex, ATNR. And if you look back into your baby's books and photo albums, you'll see it's like most of us have the picture where we're in a pose like this.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened is that some noise has happened or a sight has happened over on the side. And we flip over to see what it is, and automatically our arm stretches out, and now we're interacting. Now we're coordinating our visual system with our fine motor system.
Okay.
And we have several reflexes that are within us innately to develop learning and help us interact with our environment and learn about our internal calibrations, such as our balance system, or as we call it in the field, vestibular. But
Mm-hmm.
and so then when those things,
Basically, just before we move on, because I know this is the primary reflex is a big term, that it's different than what a reflex, like if you think of going to the doctor and they
mm-hmm,
tap your knee and your knee
right,
shoots forward, that's a
mm-hmm,
different type of reflex than what
mm-hmm.
we're dealing with here, right?
Well, yeah, but we have reflexes for development and protection.
Mm-hmm. Yep, okay.
And you're
So
right.
this is something that a child's born with. So they turn their head, their arm goes out, one bends, one goes straight, and it's
Mhm.
just a pattern that's there to start with, right? To start the
Right.
out. Okay. So when you hear the primary reflex,
Mhm.
that's the foundation of what a child's given at birth. Hopefully.
Right. Right.
All right.
And then our sensory system starts to develop in with that,
Okay.
because now I'm coordinating my hands and I'm coordinating my eyes. I'm coordinating my eye movement. I'm coordinating it with a body movement.
Mm-hmm.
And what will happen, going back to that protective piece, is that occasionally with reflexes, they begin to go into a protective mode. And if they're in protection, then they're not available there for learning. And an example of that would be is if somebody is extremely auditory sensitive, they could be going into AT&R constantly. And so then we learn a compensation skill. We learn to turn it off. And what we'll see is kids that are very highly sensitive, sometimes what will happen, in order for their head to not have to turn with their hand and then them to be able to manipulate something, they'll actually turn their head away so that they can now reach and move that arm.
Okay.
Think about that as far as like the eye and hand coordination, is that no longer are they using their eyes to help coordinate with their hand. And they're depending on just feeling for that. Not really a very efficient way.
Right. Because you're trying to learn, maybe it's handwriting or catching a ball or things like that then. Is that a skill that you would see that
Right.
impact?
Exactly. And so, and a lot of times we don't make these connections until they get older and their compensations no longer are helping them out, and their compensations are actually blocking the development that we want to see at that time period.
Okay. So that they're still looking away even though they shouldn't be have done it in the first place. And I
Right.
can see too then if your brain's feeling stressed, because we talk about this a lot in our office, is then you're not going to want to learn your ABCs. You're not going to want to learn how to write cursive, or I don't know if they teach cursive anymore, but you're not going to want to learn those higher brain skills if your lower brain is stressed out.
Right. And basically you're using that higher brain for all your compensations.
Okay.
So it's like holding yourself together in a whole lot of different ways. And so, you know, you're trying to keep yourself in an attention mode, and you have to think about your posture because the reflex pattern is locked out.
Okay.
And so then you're having to mentally think, they want me to sit straight. They want me to sit straight. They want me to sit straight. You aren't going to be attending to what you're trying to read.
Okay. And so I could see that not only you're spending all the energy focusing internally on keeping things up straight or whatever it might be, you can't pay attention. But then we also see a lot of kids who then maybe they work so hard like that to get through school, and then they get home and they melt down.
Exactly.
Can you go into that a little bit about why that happens?
Right. And you know, and that is one of the big red flags that you would want to get your child's system checked out a little bit further to find out if there's some primary reflexes that are still activated that really should be integrated by now. And largely, again, it goes back to that exhaustion piece, is that there's a couple of reflexes that we react to. That there's one that we call gallant. If you get a swipe up the side of your back, you'll scrunch over. Imagine if that one is still really active. Every time somebody bumps into you, you're reacting, and then you have to counter react to that. Or going back to that AT&R one, if you're a child that's locked yourself out of that reflex pattern, chances are you've also locked yourself out of one where your movement with your head and your shoulders and your trunk are all connected into one large block. So if my friend calls my name, I don't just turn my head and come back to what I'm working on. Now I have to turn my whole body, and now I've lost what I've worked on. So the energy level of keeping yourself coming back to attention all day long can be pretty exhausting.
Right. Way more than the other kids going through the same classroom, the same whatever scenario. Mm-hmm. If they're not spending that energy, those two kids in the same class are going to look night and day different.
Right. And that so then imagine at the end of the day how much energy you spent doing this, because you've been trying hard to keep yourself together. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it also looks like you haven't been giving any effort.
Right. I could see that being really such a dilemma for a kid, because they know they're working so hard, but maybe the teacher calls them out and says, hey, it doesn't look like you're trying. Or they go home and then they melt down, and the parents see that frustration come out, or they think, well, why, if they're such a good kid at school, are they just misbehaving at home, or what's going on?
Right.
So that challenge really occurring. It made me think of, I think it was the ATNR someone had mentioned once, it'd be like if your child's riding their bike and they turn, they don't keep going straight because their whole body turns with it, and their ears off course. Is that another of that one? Okay. What are some other common ones that you see with kiddos that a parent could be looking out for if one of those primary reflexes isn't integrated? And again, just to kind of tie it all together, if they're not integrated, the body's going to work harder. It might put their brain in a state of stress, not allow them to learn and focus. What are some other cues parents can be looking out for?
Another thing that we see really commonly is that if they didn't receive belly time, that and even children that when we do purposeful belly time, we still get a lot less than previous generations because of all the great apparatuses that we have now. It's like you fall asleep in your car seat and you stay there, and nobody wants to disrupt the sleeping baby. Right. And but what happens with that is that we develop a lot of our visual skills and a lot of our relationship with gravity as we're coming up off from our bellies. So you're laying on your floor or on a blanket or what have you, and your interactions, your primary reflexes bring you up. And you start your convergence divergence, which is the eyes coming together, eyes going apart. And if you try that right now for yourself, you'll notice is that when you look down, your eyes come together and they're ready for close focus. As your head goes up, your eyes go out and they're taking in a greater part of the world. Okay. So just even that simple piece of laying on your belly, lifting up your head, lowering it, you're getting that eye teaming, that convergence and divergence, that near focus to the far focus developed. And if we miss out on that time, we get a whole lot of things that cascade later on. Is that thinking about, at your desk doing your work, you're doing your writing at the table, and then you're having to focus up at what the teacher's doing on the board. If that focus isn't nice and smooth, you're going to be a little bit slower at processing because your timing, your leg is off. Your eyes are always trying to follow what your brain is trying to catch up to. Right. And so the teacher may be somewhere else now in the instruction, and your eyes still haven't focused at the board. Okay. Another piece with that is your relationship with the visual field, things coming at you. Is that the kids that have a really hard time where things come at them and they startle, their visual system is in that hyperactive state, and that eye-hand coordination for things coming towards you. And it can be really scary. And this is one of the things that we find with, in gym class, their participation goes down because balls flying at them are terrifying. Right. And
And I
Um,
imagine too, if they don't have the hand-eye coordination,
mhm.
they aren't able to pop up the hand to protect themselves.
Right, right, because that teaming is,
Mm-hmm.
how we know when our hand needs to go.
Right.
Um, so then, that brings in that fight and flight so you can be in a hyper aware state because you don't have that coordination. So you stay alarmed all the time because you just don't know when it's going to happen, or you shut down because
Okay.
it is too overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And then your world starts to get smaller. As I mentioned before, is that if you're looking down, you really only have this space in front of you as your world.
Right.
The other thing that will happen is, you notice with toe walkers, is that they get themselves in that erect posture. Their eyes are out, and now they're taking in too much information all the time and unable to sort it out. So they stay in that high alert state. So
Like
getting
they can never really relax. They're just always
right.
on edge. Okay.
Mhm. And
Okay.
there's a lot of reflex patterns that are involved with toe walking that keep that
Mm-hmm.
spine erect and keep the body erect.
Okay.
And so then you're feeding a cycle where it's where the posture is creating the alertness as opposed to your alertness creating the posture.
Right. Okay. What about with things like handwriting? Are there different reflexes that a parent might be looking out for, whether it's how they're writing or how they're holding things that could indicate the primary reflexes aren't integrated properly?
Right. So we have several reflexes that are involved with this upper extremity area, the arms, the shoulder, the chest. Um, and and each of those reflexes kind of plays a different role in this. But ultimately, if you don't have a good grasp pattern, you're going to really tire out. And there's several reasons why that could happen. One is that you could just be in protection with your shoulders rolled forward and these muscles tight, or it could be that this is where your stress is centered and everything up in this area is constricted. And then you don't have that freedom of motion with your shoulders, and and then that transfers on down to the hand. So, and again, you can have patterns locked into each other where when, a dynamic writing is having this freedom of movement with the wrist. And if you don't have a freedom of movement with the wrist and you're using your whole arm or you're fighting your whole arm to get the movement pattern, you exhaust easily. So, and it will show up in both exaggerated grasp and too light of a grasp.
Okay, so that's what a parent might be looking for then is the child
Mm-hmm.
is really like rigid when it
Mm-hmm.
not as relaxed as they'd like to see, or just maybe kind of floppy or
Mm-hmm.
too sloppy in a sense of tone.
Right. And
Okay.
yeah, so anytime that you're seeing an increase of effort happening
Mm-hmm.
or a lack of effort, it's really showing us that there's something off in the system.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. That if something's off and they want so hard to do the assignment everyone else in class is doing, or to please you as a parent or the teachers, that they're going to work so hard, but then you look at their neighbor and he's putting in a quarter of the effort. Something
Right.
is probably missing, and I think that's a good example too of where we might want to jump to. Well, I just want him to be able to write easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that the writing is what we see going on, but the
Mm-hmm.
reason it's there is there's something lower in the brain, more early developmentally,
Mm-hmm.
that was missing or overlooked or
Mm-hmm.
skipped.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one of the other things that we see a lot is children who you can feel like they have good balance, right? They know how to ride a bike. I had a girl who could do a cartwheel on top of the balance beam. You would think excellent balance, right? She could
Right.
not stand on one foot in a standardized position, so with her hands on her hips and one foot up at 90 degrees, she couldn't accomplish that. And what it is that sometimes they'll use momentum for their compensation. So just like riding a bicycle, if we get ourselves moving, we have a better chance of staying upright. And
Okay.
so a lot of times we'll see these kids that are really active and seem like, oh, there's nothing wrong with their coordination because they're always going, going, going. But then when you stop them and have them pause, then you can see that their vestibular system, which is that coordination of their eyes and their inner ears and how they relate to gravity, then you see, oh, wait, there's something going on with their balance. There's something happening there.
And I think it shows how smart kids are that if one of these building blocks is skipped or missing, they start to compensate around it because they know that it's going to be a weak point if they let it. So they would try to adapt to it.
Right, right.
Okay. All right. What would you say with these different things then, as a parent's looking out and they see their child's working harder than they should, or with the sensory piece, it sounds like any reflex is going to make the incoming input into the brain either too much or too little potentially. So a sensory concern. So if they're looking to get help with these areas, what does it look like with whether it's the Muscatova, the MNRI? Tell us a little bit about how you then actually go working on these things.
Right. Well, it's typically what we'll do is we start talking to the nervous system through the reflex. We start showing it the pattern, that this is the movement. And we break things down for the body to say, this is this segment, and now you can have freedom of movement here. This is this segment, and now you can have freedom of movement here. Typically what we do is we give it the information that the reflex would trigger. So a sensory piece of, a stroke up the side of the foot or a stroke up the side of the back. And then we show the body, this is the pattern that this creates. This is what the brain is supposed to register when this happens. And then doing that, we can also show the body then what freedom from that feels like and get these things sorted out.
Okay. So I could see if it's, like you mentioned, there's a spinal galant, that if the side of the spine's swipe, you move.
Right.
So if that is affecting how still your child can sit in class, because every time maybe he moves, he has to squirm around to get comfortable again. You basically take that information and you help train the brain to respond appropriately. So now he goes back to school, his back's being swiped, and he can actually sit still and pay attention.
Right, because the reflexes become integrated.
Got it. Okay.
It will be there when you need it, and it just does its own thing when it doesn't. and then it also works. It works for the less than the same that it works for the more than. So so if you think about like a child who doesn't have an active core, that they do a lot of slouching, or that they or that there's not a lot of hip movement in the way that they walk, that they're locked into a posture when they're walking, is that a lot of times what we can do is activate either the pres or the core, or the galant or the pres, which the pres is down the middle. That's the forward back motion. Okay. And activating that and getting that to regulate will give them more stability.
Okay, wonderful. And is that then why within, say, the world of OT, it feels like it's being aware of the reflexes and learning how to integrate them, that it's becoming such a foundation, because it feels like OT maybe traditionally would be, if there's sloppy handwriting, I work on handwriting all day long to try to improve it. But you're realizing that, again, that's the higher part of the brain that is more the effect when the cause is coming from lower down. So if you build a foundation with good reflex integration, then suddenly the handwriting starts to take care of itself. Is that one of the differences you would say?
Absolutely. And then the other thing that will come about is, as we're working on these different reflexes, that they're responsible for more things than just one skill.
Mhm.
So if we're working on grasp, what we'll also find is that, we get better definition of my space and your space, because now
Ah,
we've got a greater awareness of our arms.
okay.
And that helps us create that social boundary around ourselves
Mhm.
too.
Interesting.
So social relationships become more natural.
Right.
I have one story where I was working on, grasp and handwriting with a boy, and doing it through the reflex method, and working on a lot of the visual system pieces. And one day his dad came in and said he's playing with his sister more. He said previous to that, he had not
Mhm.
interacted with his sister. So it's like he comes for handwriting, and now they're playing board games together.
Right. Wonderful. I bet you it's so cool to see that change um,
Right.
in so many ways, to know it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be such a deep impact, because to be moving forward, and there's a lot more school, I'm sure, for him to come to have
Mm-hmm.
that social interaction is such a foundational skill too to get through life.
Right.
And is that because we have some families that we refer, for example, to you guys that have done OT in the past, but it
Mm-hmm.
feels like because they haven't looked at the reflexes that their OT, either they say they graduated from it
Mm-hmm.
or they were going along and they kind of plateaued.
Mm-hmm.
Is it likely because they're not looking at reflex integration?
And a couple of things happen is that there's a lot of really good traditional OT happening out there
Yeah.
where they graduate and we never hear about it again.
Hmm.
And so it's like those kids, they move on, and
Right.
then there's the kids that, yeah, perhaps it wasn't something that went down to the foundational level, or their compensations carried them through to that point, and then their compensations weren't able to make it through that next step of development. That
Okay.
as the demands become bigger and the challenges become larger, that then those compensations kind of fall away and aren't available for them anymore.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. And do you find with if someone's been compensating longer, so if they're an
Mm-hmm.
older kid and this has been missed since early on, does it take a lot longer to see progress? What do you notice with different ages?
Um, it's we're still able to get results. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I we we have kids that are seniors in high school that we're getting results with.
Okay.
Well, we have adults that we see that we get results with, and ourselves too. Um,
Mhm.
but what I think really makes a big difference for whether or not how fast this goes is also how many supports they have outside of the therapy.
Yeah.
So whether they're doing home exercise program with it, or even if they're getting opportunities to spontaneously play. Because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll unlock something, and if they're used to being just sitting around doing their video game, then they don't have that opportunity to find out that they have a new skill.
Right.
So there's a lot of times at graduation I'll teach them how to juggle. And it's because it's like, see, now you can do things that you never knew you could do.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, and that's, I mean, we do the same thing with our chiropractic work. And when we're doing the neurological adjusting, if you adjust and they go home and play video games, it takes a lot longer, because for the brain to really integrate the information, it needs moving and actually practicing it, like learning a new sport or any new skill.
Right. And for those pathways to become stronger, they need
Mhm.
use.
Absolutely. All right. So as we wrap up here today, it seems like this has been really for, again, the parents out there. If your child, if you look back on your child's history and you see like, it feels like there's a few kind of quirky things they had going on, maybe, or you notice some of the examples that Michelle shared. I think that all seems like a good indicator that something in the reflex system might have been missed or not integrated.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put your contact info in the comments below at A Chance to Grow.
Thank you.
Anything else, Michelle, as parting words for parents to know, or any messages that you want to share before we wrap up today?
I think it really goes back to that effort part, is that, life really should not be too hard. It's, when we put in effort, we should be able to see results. And if we're really trying hard and things just don't seem to be advancing, then that's probably time that we need some therapeutic intervention.
Absolutely. Especially with kids, right? Their brains are so receptive. They learn so quickly that if
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're hitting your head against a wall or just hit that plateau, for a
Right,
child especially, it just shouldn't be that way. So,
right.
all right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michelle. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if you guys have questions as you're watching this too, and you want to put in the comments, we can definitely hop on. If you're not watching this live and you want to post questions, we'll be able to hop on and answer those questions too. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, Michelle. We'll talk to you later. And
All
everyone
right.
out there, thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.